If you ever been down to the beach, you know it gets windy. Sometimes you get a sunburn because you don't realize how hot that weather is because the wind is blowing so strong. It's even stronger once you go offshore.
Offshore wind. I would say it's the part of the clean energy transition that has been the most controversial, but then battery storage entered the picture. And I promise we'll get to that in a future episode. Today we're going to focus on offshore wind. For many, the most exciting part of the clean energy future. Welcome to Plugging In, powering our way to a brighter and healthier New York. I'm your host, Barry Wygel. Each episode on this podcast, we will discuss a different topic related to clean energy, explaining complex topics in a way you can understand. Become part of the community as we help to make a brighter and healthier New York.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in, the future of New York is here.
For many across the state, solar and wind power is nothing new. They've seen it on their neighbor's roof or driving along the thruway. But until very recently, offshore wind was a European technology, but one that the U.S. stands to benefit a great deal from. President Biden has a goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2030. To simplify that, 30 gigawatts is enough to power 10 million homes. To show you just how much work we need to do, we power currently 75,000 homes today with offshore wind power. But what makes this industry so exciting is how New York's unique geography will let us harness this power to its fullest potential. Our guest today, Nick Guariglia, Outreach Manager for the New York Offshore Wind Alliance. Nick is on the front line, or the front beach, I guess I could say, for offshore wind. He's based on Long Island and educates people every day on the benefits and opportunities that this industry will bring. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So we'll start easy. What is the definition of offshore wind?
The definition of offshore wind is basically the use of the sea and placing turbines out in the sea to harness wind energy and then transport it to the New York State grid.
So this is similar to wind power, kind of. Are these the same turbines that are used on land? Are they going out to sea?
This is wind power. So that is 100%. You're right about that. It's not similar. It is wind power. They are not the same turbines. They are the same technology, but these turbines are much larger. To give you a little bit of an idea, GE produces onshore wind turbines, and they run from 2 megawatts to 6 megawatts. The offshore wind ones, the standard is a 15 megawatt turbine. What does that mean? Produces a ton more energy and is so much larger. The blades alone are 150 feet. So just to give you that idea, and then the height of these are 850 feet.
Yeah, that seems massive and it seems expensive. So to buy that turbine, to put it on a boat, get it out to sea, dig down into the seafloor, why can't we just build more upstate?
You could build a ton upstate, and we certainly encourage that. But to actually meet the power needs that are necessary for New York State, especially for the downstate region, you need to build offshore wind farms.
And I'm assuming on Long Island, I'm not as familiar as with upstate New York, there's not as many 1,000-acre plots that you could plop these land-based turbines on.
Not only is there not 1,000 acres, there's no acres, right? Like there's very few. Long Island, Westchester, New York City, right? Manhattan is one of the densest places in the entire world. There is no land. There's no large swaths of land. Not just to place onshore turbines, but also to have solar fields. Like there is not enough space to do any other really large-scale renewable energy. Plus, offshore wind turbines are way more efficient. They produce more energy for this population base, and we have a coastal population base which is primed to receive this transmission.
That makes a lot of sense. So one thing we're going to talk about, not just on this episode, but a lot of episodes, is why projects go in certain places. Because a lot of people will be driving, they'll see an abandoned XYZ, and they'll say, well, why don't we just use that? Why can't we build that? Or why can't we build, one mega farm in the middle of the desert and power the whole country? But offshore wind kind of plays into this. It's important to put the power source near where it's needed, because it's very, very expensive to move that power.
Not only is it very, very expensive, but you also lose power the further it has to travel. The New York Bight, that's the continental shelf that we're all dealing with right here. It's the coast of Long Island. It's the coast of Manhattan. It is ideal. One, because it's very close to a very large population base. Millions and millions of people live in Long Island. They live in New York City. They live in Westchester. And even, New Jersey, right? New Jersey is going to benefit from offshore wind as well. What makes our area, the New York Bight, very, very appealing is we have extremely shallow sea depths. I think that the deepest part of the New York Bight is only 85 meters, which is 270 feet. Out in California, you're talking about thousands of feet. And why they're, toying with the technology of floating wind is because they can't drive pilings down to put these stationary turbines in. Also, we have very, very strong winds. Throughout the entire year, especially in the winter, we have strong winds coming off our coast. If you've ever been down to the beach, it gets windy, right? Like sometimes you don't get a sunburn, or you get a sunburn because you don't realize how hot that weather is because the wind is blowing so strong. It's even stronger once you go offshore.
So like I mentioned in the intro, this is new in the United States. Is it being done successfully elsewhere?
It's being done successfully everywhere. You can go to Asia. China is doing this all over. But one of the first places this really started was Europe. And Europe sees such success that they have about 16 gigawatts of offshore wind right now. And they are planning to do 12 gigawatts per year. And that's what the European Union has already committed to. 12 gigawatts per year moving forward, because they want to meet all those demands and get a very reliable and safe energy power source that is not going to be subject to any kind of political or geopolitical winds, like a war in Ukraine.
Yeah, good point. So bringing it back to New York, what is the status of the industry?
Well, the status is very bright, I would say. We have, New York is the home of the first offshore wind utility scale farm. It's called South Fork Wind Farm. It's 30 miles off of Montauk's coast, and it's powering the entire East End. 70,000 households are being powered in East Hampton, Montauk, and some parts of Southampton just by this 12-turbine wind farm. And that's just so far out, people don't even know it's happening. When I talk to people, all over Long Island, they're like, so when is this going to happen? And I tell them it's already happening. And they're like, what do you mean? And I go, the East End is being powered by this. So they're like, but we don't know about any of the construction. I'm like, exactly. You won't even know it's happening because you won't see them. And once the construction's done, there is no disturbance.
So the South Fork Wind Project that's online, are those visible from shore?
No. I mean, if you can't, I've looked, you can't see them. And even on a crystal clear day, you can't see them. So I don't believe they're going to be visible from shore. You'd have to take a boat. 30 nautical miles is very far. We do have two other really big projects that have been contracted with NYSERDA. Empire Wind 1, which is going to be roughly about 14 to 15 miles off of the shores of Jones Beach. And then we also have Sunrise Wind, which is going to be 27 miles off of the shores of the East End.
So Empire Wind 1 is the one that you could see under optimal conditions. Is that the one that we hear that?
Very optimal conditions. It'd have to be a crystal clear day, no humidity, which anybody that lives on Long Island knows that we live in humidity. It could be the middle of the winter and it's humid. So it would really be a tough thing to see. And even if you do see it, it's going to be minuscule.
And this is kind of hard to visualize because it is new and change is scary. That'll be another theme on this podcast. But when you Google offshore wind pictures, you do see a lot of European ones that are much, much, much closer, almost right off the beach. So the ones we're talking about, the projects you just mentioned, those are not as close as these European ones.
Correct.
Excellent.
And let me tell you, these two projects are going to power over 1.2 million homes. So you're talking about a big chunk of stable, reliable power coming to New York's grid. And that's one of the biggest importances that we have to stress is energy independence.
We're here recording in Albany today, and why should people upstate care about offshore wind?
I mean, pretty simple answer. Jobs, economic development. it's going to affect the entire state. It's not just downstate that's going to benefit from this. Plus, the transmission that's going to be generated from this, the energy, it will go upstate in some way. So it's going to benefit the entire state. When we talk about upstate ports, we're talking about providing manufacturing and then shipping those parts downstate, right? Like, you could ship as many parts as you want maybe on a tractor trailer, but it's not going to be able to transport the large components of these turbines. These turbines are humongous, right? Like, so you have to put them on barges. They have to be loaded somewhere. They have to be staged somewhere. These Port of Albany and Port of Caymans, they're both going to be key in making sure those manufacturing plants can transport the parts that are necessary to go downstate and into the ocean.
Guess I technically work in offshore wind now, but I get seasick and I don't want to go out on a boat, so I still have a chance to work in this industry.
The 9 gigawatts that are required to be created by 2035, according to the New York CLCPA, which is the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, which was passed in 2019, is going to create roughly 10,000 jobs. 10,000 of those jobs, all in offshore wind, but they're not all offshore.
We're not all getting on a boat.
Yeah. No, not everybody's going to hop on a boat. Not everybody's going to be, dropping these turbines in the ocean. What they're going to be doing is manufacturing the parts. What they're going to be doing is engineering the new technologies that come with it. Right now, there is a 15 megawatt turbine that's created and is the standard throughout the U.S. and throughout, much of Europe. But there's some ideas of creating an 18 megawatt turbine. They need engineers for that. Not to mention, you need food facilities. You need to make sure that the transmission cables are run through the streets, and then the streets are repaved. This is going to create jobs, not just directly working on those wind farms.
We're going to devote an entire episode to the misinformation surrounding offshore wind. There's misinformation about whales, reefs, views we talked about already today, and EMF. What do you think are the biggest cons to the industry, or what is the biggest source of misinformation you want to tackle right now?
So a con and misinformation are two very different things, Barry.
Yes, and I threw them in together. So you can go one at a time, though.
I now have been in this for a few months. I really believe that the biggest hurdle that we have right now is supply chain within the United States. We need manufacturers to build out their facilities. We need them to commit to actually building these pieces. And that's something that, while there's uncertainty in when these projects are going to take place, the manufacturers are part of that uncertainty because they're not committing. And it's coming around, and we have to give the industry developers the ability to make sure that these wind farms are actually happening. And that's why Empire Wind 1 and Sunrise are so important, because they're going to be the first of their kind.
We talked about polling with renewable energy on the last episode. The vast majority of people support offshore wind in New York. The polling shows that. There is a vocal minority. Are they winning?
No. They're not changing the minds of anybody. These are the people that will say no to anything that you put in front of them. I once was in a room with a bunch of people, and they're all so against offshore wind, and they were like, but nuclear is the answer. We want to get away from fossil fuels. Nuclear. And somebody goes, well, are we allowed to put it in your neighborhood? And they're like, no. So the people that are vocal, the people that are against this, they're not going to change their mind on anything. They want status quo. They don't want change. We have to make sure that the 75% of people that do support this are vocal also.
Excellent. Last question. If you're in that 75%, you want to support, you want to get involved, how can you do it?
There are about 350 ways to get involved. The Sierra Club has put on global wind events that show legislators and the governors that there is a vast majority of people that are important enough to listen to. And they're really in favor of this. But I think that the best way you can support this, if you don't want to write a letter to your elected official or start a social media campaign, is to, when in the room and this is brought up, speak favorably about it. Talk to your friends and family about it. Make sure that they know that you support it, and there's a lot of benefits to it. And we're going to be explaining a lot of those benefits on this podcast, so I think that's a good idea.
Good. All right, Nick Guariglia, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plugging In. I hope you learned something, and I hope you share this knowledge with someone else. It would be incredibly helpful if you leave us a 5-star review wherever you found this podcast. If there's a topic you would like us to cover in the future or have a question about clean energy, send us an email at podcast@aceny.org. You can follow us on social media using the links in the show notes, or consider joining our Clean Energy Supporters mailing list at aceny.org/support. Your support is crucial to creating a brighter and healthier New York. I'll see you next time.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in the future